Everyone talks about Transformers and He-Man when they talk about 1985 cartoons, but nobody ever mentions the 10 shows that launched the same year and were dead within months. One had the voice actors from Transformers and still couldn't survive. Another was a wrestling cartoon where Hulk Hogan didn't even voice himself.
Stay close to those trucks!
And one show was so culturally offensive that the entire industry agreed to pretend it never happened. These are 10 forgotten 80s cartoons from 1985 that disappeared without a trace. The shows that fell through the cracks while the big franchises got all the glory. This video gives you the full story behind each one, who made them, why they failed, and whether any of them deserved better. If you're tired of hearing about the same 5 80s cartoons and want the real history, subscribe and hit the bell. So let's get started. Coming in at number 10 is Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines, which aired in syndication in 1985 as part of the Super Sunday programming block. And if you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Produced by Sunbow Productions and Marvel Productions, the same partnership behind Transformers and G.I. Joe, this show was greenlit to capitalize on the monster truck craze that was sweeping America in the mid-80s. Somebody at Sunbow looked at arena-packing monster truck rallies and thought there's a cartoon in there. The premise was straightforward. A team of monster truck drivers traveled the world battling an evil villain named Mr. Big, who wanted to use ancient artifacts to take over the planet. It was Monster Trucks meets Indiana Jones meets Saturday morning sci-fi, which sounds like it should have been the greatest show ever made. The team drove souped-up vehicles through jungles, deserts, and ancient ruins while Mr. Big threw everything he had at them. What made Bigfoot interesting was its format. These weren't full 22-minute episodes. They were 6-minute shorts, designed to run alongside Jem and the Holograms, Robotix, and Inhumanoids in the Super Sunday Omnibus block. That format was both the show's creative identity and its death sentence, because the show never had room to breathe, never had time to develop its characters, and never stood a chance of building its own fan base. The voice cast was functional, but not star-studded, just workhorses of the 80s voice acting scene doing their jobs, but nobody you'd put on a poster. The show premiered in 1985, ran for exactly 9 6-minute episodes, and occupied a small corner of the Super Sunday time slot that most kids fast-forwarded through to get to Jem. The part of Bigfoot's story that really stings is that it aired in the exact same programming block as Jem and the Holograms. Jem became a cultural phenomenon, a franchise that's still generating new content today. Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines never got a full series, was never released on home video as a standalone product, and was never given a real chance. Same block, same producers, same year, and one became iconic while the other became invisible. But Bigfoot wasn't the only casualty of that Super Sunday experiment. Number 9 is Robotix, which aired in that exact same Super Sunday syndication block in 1985, produced by Sunbow Productions and Marvel Productions with animation handled by Toei Animation in Japan. The show existed for one reason. Milton Bradley had a construction toy line, oversized building sets in the vein of Erector sets and Connects, and they needed a cartoon to move product off shelves. The premise had real ambition. On the alien world of Scalor, 2 factions of massive robots were locked in a civil war between the peaceful Protectons and the evil Terracors. A group of human astronauts crash-landed on Scalor and got caught in the middle, with each human forming a telepathic bond with one of the giant robots. The concept combined Transformers with a survival drama on an alien planet. The characters operated on the classic hero-villain axis, but the telepathic bond between humans and robots added a layer most shows that year didn't bother with. The Protectons were noble and protective, the Terracors were ruthless and power-hungry, and the humans had to navigate a war they didn't start and couldn't leave. What set Robotix apart was that it tried to take the giant robot concept in a harder science fiction direction than anything else on TV. This wasn't robots punching each other in downtown Manhattan. This was alien civil war with real consequences, animated by one of the best studios in Japan. It had the concept, the animation quality, and the ambition to be something special. And the voice cast proves it. Peter Cullen, the voice of Optimus Prime, was in this show. Frank Welker, the voice of Megatron, was in this show. 2 of the most iconic voice actors of the decade were lending their talents to Robotix, and almost nobody knows it. The show premiered in 1985 and ran for just 15 6-minute episodes, not full-length episodes, the same bite-sized format as Bigfoot. That alone crippled it. But the real killer was the toy line. Milton Bradley's Robotix construction sets looked absolutely nothing like the characters in the cartoon. Kids saw these cool robot warriors on TV, went to the store, and found a box of plastic beams and connectors. The disconnect was total. Marvel Comics tried a comic book tie-in, and it lasted exactly one issue. Meanwhile, Gem and Inhumanoids from the exact same Super Sunday block both got promoted to their own full series while Robotix was left behind, a show with Optimus Prime's voice actor that nobody remembers existed. Now, if a show getting buried inside a programming block sounds unfair, wait until you hear what happened to number 8, because that show didn't just get forgotten, it got erased. Number 8 is Paw Paws, which premiered on ABC in 1985 as part of the Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera programming block. And its story is unlike anything else on this list because Paw Paws didn't just fade away, it was erased deliberately. Produced by Hanna-Barbera, the show followed a tribe of tiny bear cubs on adventures loosely inspired by Native American cultural themes. The bears had names derived from indigenous language, lived in a world filled with totems and nature magic, and the whole thing was framed as a light-hearted fantasy romp for young kids. The characters were designed to be cute and marketable because this was Hanna-Barbera doing what Hanna-Barbera did best in the 80s, which was churning out cuddly animal characters for the Saturday morning lineup. The heroes were brave little bears, the villains were bumbling bad guys, and the formula was tried and true. What made Paw Paws unique at the time was its cultural setting. In an era dominated by robots, space warriors, and toy commercials, a show built around nature and indigenous-inspired mythology stood out visually and thematically. It looked different from everything else on the dial. The show ran for 21 episodes across 1985 and 1986 in its Saturday morning time slot on ABC. And then something shifted. As cultural awareness around the portrayal of indigenous peoples in media grew through the late 80s and 90s, Paw Paws went from forgotten to deliberately buried. The show's depiction of Native American culture filtered through cartoon bears, aimed at 5-year-olds, was publicly called out as stereotypical and reductive. The industry didn't just let Paw Paws fade, they made sure it disappeared. It was never re-released, never revived, never repackaged for home video, and no streaming platform has touched it. Most cartoons on this list were forgotten by accident. Paw Paws is one of the rare shows that was forgotten on purpose. And while being deliberately erased is one way to vanish, the next show on this list proves there's something almost worse, which is being turned into something completely unrecognizable. Number 7 is It's Punky Brewster, which premiered on NBC's Saturday morning lineup on September 14, 1985. And if you think you know what this show was about because you watched the live-action sitcom, you are not even close. This animated spin-off was produced by Ruby Spears, and the origin story is pure 80s network logic. NBC had a moderately successful live-action sitcom called Punky Brewster about a scrappy orphan girl navigating the foster care system. A show that dealt with real issues like poverty, abandonment, and growing up without parents. The live-action version had genuine emotional weight. So, naturally, NBC looked at this grounded, heartfelt show and said, what if they gave the same character a magical interdimensional creature? The cartoon version of Punky Brewster had a companion named Glomer, a fuzzy, leprechaun-like being from a dimension called Chondoon who could grant wishes, teleport, and conjure objects out of thin air. Every episode, Punky and her friends would get into some fantastical situation like shrinking to microscopic size, traveling through time, or visiting alien worlds, all powered by Glomer's magic. The same character who dealt with the realities of being a foster kid on Tuesday night was fighting interdimensional villains on Saturday morning. The show's cast of characters included all of Punky's friends from the live-action version, now reimagined for cartoon adventures, plus Glomer as the breakout magical sidekick. The human characters provided heart, while Glomer provided the chaos. This is the most perfect example on this entire list of what networks did to grounded properties in the 80s. You had a sitcom about a real kid dealing with real problems, and the Saturday morning version gave her a teleporting gopher from another dimension. It tells you everything about what networks thought kids wanted versus what adults were watching. It's Punky Brewster ran for 26 episodes across one season on NBC's Saturday morning block. The voice cast included Soleil Moon Frye reprising her live-action role as Punky, which gave the cartoon some credibility, along with veteran voice actors filling out the supporting cast. But one season was all it got. The live-action show had its own struggles with ratings, and the cartoon, removed from the emotional core that made the original special, vanished after its initial run. It's barely remembered today, even by hardcore Punky Brewster fans. The live-action show has been revived, rebooted, and discussed for decades, but the cartoon where Punky had a magic dimension-hopping friend is just gone. And if vanishing after one season sounds rough, the next cartoon didn't even get that much of a legacy because it vanished so completely that you can barely prove it ever existed at all. Number 6 is Galtar and the Golden Lance, which aired in syndication in 1985 as part of the Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera. And if you want to know what it feels like for a cartoon to truly vanish from the face of the earth, this is your answer. Produced by Hanna-Barbera, Galtar was created for one reason: He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was a monster hit, and every studio in Hollywood wanted their own sword and sorcery franchise. Hanna-Barbera's answer was Galtar, a muscular warrior wielding a magical golden lance on a quest for vengeance against the evil warlord Tormak, who had destroyed Galtar's family and stolen a sacred weapon. The show was set in a lush fantasy world full of sorcery, monsters, and ancient ruins. The characters followed the classic fantasy template. Galtar was the noble hero, driven by revenge but guided by honor. Princess Goleta was his ally and fellow warrior, not just a damsel, which was slightly ahead of its time. Tormak was the tyrant villain with dark magic at his command, and a young boy named Zorn rounded out the team as the kid audience surrogate. The dynamic worked, even if it never surprised you. What made Galtar unique was its tone. While most action cartoons that year leaned into sci-fi gadgets or toy-driven gimmicks, Galtar played its fantasy premise completely straight. There were no vehicles to sell, no transforming weapons, no team of color-coded heroes. It was one man, one lance, and a revenge quest, closer in spirit to Conan the Barbarian than to He-Man, despite the obvious visual similarities. That commitment to pure fantasy storytelling was both its creative strength and its commercial weakness. The show ran for 21 episodes in 1985 and 1986, occupying its syndicated time slot without much fanfare. It never had a toy line with real traction, and it never had a breakout character. And when it ended, the silence was total. Galtar and the Golden Lance has never been released on DVD. It's barely available anywhere online, and there is almost zero fan community keeping its memory alive. In an era where even the most obscure 80s cartoons have dedicated wikis and YouTube tributes, Galtar has practically nothing. It is one of the most truly forgotten cartoons of the entire 1980s, a show that didn't just get cancelled, but got swallowed whole. And yet, as invisible as Galtar became, the next cartoon on this list had the opposite problem. It had everything going for it: 75 episodes, a massive toy line, and a concept built to dominate, and it still ended up completely forgotten. Number 5 is M.A.S.K, which stands for Mobile Armored Strike Command, and it aired in syndication starting in 1985. This is the entry on the list that will make you say, wait, how is this show forgotten? Because by every measure that mattered in the 80s, M.A.S.K had everything it needed to become a household name. Produced by DIC Entertainment in partnership with Kenner, M.A.S.K was built from the ground up as a toy-selling machine. The concept was engineered in a boardroom before a single script was written, taking G.I. Joe's military team structure and combining it with Transformers' vehicle gimmick. The result was Matt Tracker and his team of heroes, each equipped with a transforming vehicle and a special mask that granted unique powers. A motorcycle that became a helicopter, a Camaro that turned into a jet, a Jeep that converted into a boat, and each mask did something different from energy blasts to holograms to anti-gravity. The villains were Venom, the vicious evil network of mayhem, led by Miles Mayhem, who had his own squad of mask-wearing bad guys with their own transforming vehicles. Every episode was the same satisfying formula, where Venom launches a scheme, Matt Tracker assembles the right team members, and the good guys win with superior mask and vehicle combinations. The roster of characters was massive. Matt Tracker was the square-jawed leader, Bruce Sato was the strategist, Dusty Hayes was the wheelman, and Hondo McClane was the muscle. The villains, Miles Mayhem, Sly Rax, and Cliff Dagger, Each had distinct personalities that went beyond evil for evil's sake. The show actually gave its villains motivations, which was more than most toy commercials bothered with. What made M.A.S.K unique was that the hybrid concept worked. The transforming vehicles were visually spectacular. The masks added a layer of tactical strategy to every battle, and the show had a surprisingly strong sense of adventure, with episodes taking the team around the world from pyramids to volcanoes to underwater ruins. It felt bigger than a toy commercial, even though that's exactly what it was. The voice cast was stacked with working pros, including Doug Stone as Matt Tracker, Brendan McCain as Miles Mayhem, and Mark Halloran, among others. Reliable performers who brought energy to every episode, even if they weren't household names. The show premiered in the fall of 1985, ran for 75 episodes across 2 seasons, and had a massive toy line that filled shelves at every Toys R Us in America. And then it simply stopped existing in popular culture. The toy line slowed down, Kenner shifted focus, DIC moved on, and while Transformers and G.I. Joe, the two franchises M.A.S.K was literally engineered to compete with, went on to become permanent fixtures of pop culture with movies, reboots, and multi-billion-dollar merchandise empires. M.A.S.K fell into a silence so deep that most people under 40 have never even heard the name. 75 episodes, a massive toy line, and a concept that was essentially Transformers meets G.I. Joe, and nobody talks about it anymore. And if you think that story is wild, the next 5 cartoons make everything I've covered so far look lucky. Number 4 is Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling, which premiered on CBS's Saturday morning lineup in 1985, and the timing could not have been more perfect or the execution more bizarre. This was peak Hulkamania. WrestleMania 1 had just aired in March of 1985, and professional wrestling had exploded from a regional curiosity into a mainstream pop culture phenomenon practically overnight, making Hulk Hogan the biggest star on the planet. CBS looked at those numbers and did what every network did in the 80s. When something got popular, they turned it into a cartoon. The show was produced by DIC Entertainment, and the pitch was simple: take real WWF wrestlers and put them in animated adventures. The premise is where things went sideways in the most delightful way possible. The cartoon featured animated versions of real WWF superstars, including Hulk Hogan, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Andre the Giant, the Iron Sheik, Junkyard Dog, Captain Lou Albano, Nikolai Volkov, Hillbilly Jim, and more. But instead of wrestling, they got into completely random situational adventures. Hulk Hogan solving a mystery in a haunted house, Andre the Giant on a treasure hunt, Roddy Piper scheming to cheat in a cross-country race. The wrestlers were divided into faces and heels, just like in the ring. But the conflicts were played out through slapstick comedy and adventure plots that had absolutely nothing to do with professional wrestling. The Hero Squad was led by Hulk Hogan, with Junkyard Dog, Andre the Giant, Wendy Richter, Hillbilly Jim, Tito Santana, and Captain Lou Albano as the good guys. The villains were Roddy Piper, the Iron Sheik, Nikolai Volkov, and Mr. Fuji. Each character was a cartoonified version of their wrestling persona, turned up to 11. The part that makes this whole thing insane is that none of the actual wrestlers voiced their own characters, not one. Hulk Hogan did not voice cartoon Hulk Hogan. Andre the Giant did not voice cartoon Andre. The entire voice cast was made up of professional voice actors doing impressions of the wrestlers. Brad Garrett, who would later become famous on Everybody Loves Raymond, voiced Hulk Hogan. James Avery, Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, voiced the Junkyard Dog. Gene Okerlund was the only real WWF personality who appeared, and only in live-action bumper segments between cartoon episodes. What made this show unique was the collision of 2 completely separate nostalgia streams. Wrestling fans and cartoon fans almost never overlap in cultural memory, but this show sits right at the intersection. And it's both better and worse than you imagine. The animation was standard DIC quality, and the plots were absurd, but the energy of mid-80s WWF translated through Saturday morning cartoon logic created something that was impossible to replicate. The show premiered in September 1985, ran for 26 episodes through 1986, and occupied CBS's prime Saturday morning real estate. It was canceled after 1 season, not because of ratings necessarily, but because the WWF licensing deal was expensive, the wrestling boom was starting to cool slightly, and CBS wanted to go in a different direction. Wrestling nostalgia has kept this one alive in the memory of older fans. But it exists in a weird blind spot. Too cartoonish for wrestling historians to take seriously, and too wrestling-focused for animation fans to care. It's remembered fondly by the people who were there, and completely unknown to everyone else. But at least Hulk Hogan's cartoon got 26 episodes. The next show on this list wasn't that lucky, and the reason it got cancelled might be the most brutal story of the entire countdown. Number 3 is Sectaurs, Warriors of Symbion, which aired in syndication in 1985, and this is the entry where you realize just how ruthless the 80s toy market really was. Produced by Ruby Spears to promote a Coleco toy line, Sectaurs was born in the conference rooms of the toy industry. Coleco looked at the success of He-Man and Transformers and decided to carve out a niche that nobody else was filling: giant insects. The thinking was that boys loved action figures, boys loved creatures, and insects were an untapped visual goldmine. They weren't wrong about the concept. They were catastrophically wrong about the execution. The show was set on Symbion, a distant planet where a genetic experiment had gone wrong centuries earlier, fusing the world's inhabitants with insect and arachnid DNA. Warriors on Symbion didn't just fight alongside giant bugs, they were telepathically bonded with them, sharing thoughts and senses. The hero faction, the Shining Realm, was led by Prince Dargon, who rode a massive battle beetle named Dragonflyer. The villain faction, the Dark Domain, was led by General Spidrax, bonded to a giant spider named Spiderflyer. The war between the two factions drove every episode, with ancient technology and forbidden genetic science lurking beneath the surface. The characters had genuine depth for a toy-driven show. Dargon was noble but reckless, Spidrax was cunning and cruel, and the supporting warriors on both sides had distinct personalities and unique insect partners. The world-building was surprisingly ambitious because Symbion felt like a real place with real history, not just a backdrop for toy battles. What made Sectaurs unique was its willingness to go dark. This was not a show that pulled its punches. The insect designs were detailed and unsettling, and the tone was closer to a science fiction war story than a Saturday morning toy commercial. In a year dominated by bright colors and upbeat theme songs, Sectaurs looked and felt like nothing else on television. And the voice cast was quietly spectacular. Peter Cullen, yes, Optimus Prime, again, was in this show. Frank Welker, Megatron, was in this show. Tress MacNeille, who would go on to voice dozens of iconic characters across The Simpsons, Futurama, and Animaniacs, was in this show. 3 of the most accomplished voice actors of the 20th century, all lending their talents to a cartoon about telepathic insect warriors, and almost no one alive knows this. The tragedy of Sectaurs is that it premiered in 1985 and ran for a grand total of 5 episodes, one of the shortest-lived cartoons in 80s history. The reason was simple and brutal. Kids were terrified of the toys. Coleco's Sectaurs action figures were ambitious, with large-scale insect figures that had articulated legs, moving mandibles, and bristly textures. They looked incredible on a shelf, but when a 7-year-old picked one up and felt those legs moving in their hand, the reaction wasn't excitement, it was revulsion. Parents reported kids refusing to touch them, and sales collapsed almost immediately. No toy sales meant no show. And the entire project, the cartoon, the toy line, the planned expansions, was dead on arrival. 5 episodes, a voice cast that included Optimus Prime and Megatron, and a concept that was ahead of its time, all killed because kids thought the toys were too creepy to play with. And if 5 episodes sounds like the shortest run a show could possibly have, you'd be right. But what happened to the next show on this list is somehow even more painful, because it actually got a full run, and it still got destroyed. Number 2 is Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors, which aired in syndication starting in 1985. And this show's story might be the most frustrating on the entire list because Jayce did almost everything right and still got destroyed. Produced by DIC Entertainment, Jayce was created alongside a Mattel toy line of vehicles that split into interchangeable parts. The cartoon followed Jayce, a young hero searching the galaxy for his father, a scientist whose botanical experiment had accidentally created the monster mines, an army of organic, plant-like creatures that could generate their own evil vehicles and were spreading across the universe like a living invasion. Jayce led the Lightning League, a ragtag team of heroes in armed vehicles against the monster minds and their leader, the ruthless Saw Boss. The cast of characters was one of the best assembled teams in 80s animation. Jayce was the earnest young hero, driven by the need to find his father and undo the catastrophe. Herc Stormsword was the Han Solo of the group, a cocky mercenary pilot with a heart of gold. Oon was a sentient suit of armor, who served as Jayce's loyal protector. Flora was a half-plant girl with a connection to the monster mind's biology. And Gillian was the wise old wizard who kept the team grounded. The dynamic between these characters was richer and more layered than 90% of the action cartoons airing that year. What made Jayce unique was the quality of its storytelling. DIC hired J. Michael Straczynski, who would later create Babylon 5, as head writer. The show had genuine character arcs, moral complexity, and a serialized quest structure that gave it forward momentum most episodic cartoons lacked. The monster minds were a creepy antagonist with organic vehicles that grew and mutated, giving the show a body horror edge that was unusual for children's television. And visually, the contrast between the sleek Lightning League vehicles and the twisted, vine-covered monster mind machines was striking. The voice cast was led by Hal Rail as Jayce, with Len Carlson, Dan Hennessy, and the legendary Charles Adler filling out the roster. But the show's real vocal legacy is its theme song composed by Shuki Levy, the same man behind the Inspector Gadget and He-Man themes. The Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors opening is still considered one of the greatest cartoon intros of the entire decade by fans who remember it. It's been covered, remixed, and uploaded hundreds of times on YouTube by people who can't forget that melody. Jayce premiered in 1985 and ran for 65 episodes, a full, healthy production run by any standard. It occupied syndicated time slots across the country. It had a toy line, a theme song people loved, strong writing, and a concept that worked. And then Mattel pulled the plug on the toys. Sales hadn't met projections and the vehicles, while fun, didn't have the brand recognition of Transformers or the cultural weight of G.I. Joe. In the 80s, when the toys stopped selling, the show stopped existing. No toy revenue meant no production budget. No production budget meant no new episodes, and no new episodes meant the planned series finale, which would have resolved Jayce's quest to find his father and defeat the monster minds once and for all, was never produced. 65 episodes of a well-written show, and the story simply stops. No resolution, no final battle, no reunion between Jayce and his father. The narrative was abandoned mid-sentence, and 30-plus years later, it still has never been finished. A show with 65 episodes and zero closure, one of the most complete incomplete stories in cartoon history. But there is one cartoon left on this list, and it carries the most famous name of the entire countdown, which makes what happened to it almost impossible to believe. The #1 most forgotten cartoon of 1985 carries the most famous name on this entire list, which makes its story even more unbelievable. It's the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo premiered on ABC's Saturday morning lineup in 1985, and it represented the most radical reinvention the Scooby-Doo franchise had ever attempted. After nearly 2 decades of the ghost is actually Old Man Jenkins in a mask, this show did something the franchise had never done before. It made the ghosts real. Produced by Hanna-Barbera, The 13 Ghosts was built on a brilliant premise. Scooby-Doo and Shaggy accidentally open the chest of demons, releasing 13 of the most dangerous ghosts and monsters in the world, and now, guided by the mysterious Vincent Van Ghoul, they have to travel the globe and recapture every single one. The show stripped the cast down to its core with Scooby, Shaggy, Scrappy-Doo, and a new kid character named Flim-Flam, then sent them on a serialized quest that gave the series something it had never had before: a through line. Each episode wasn't a standalone mystery, but one chapter in a larger story with a specific, countable goal. Capture all 13 ghosts, close the chest, save the world. The characters worked in unexpected ways. Scooby and Shaggy were their usual cowardly, lovable selves. Scrappy-Doo, divisive as always, provided the bravery the team needed. Flim-Flam was a streetwise kid hustler who added comic relief and energy. But the real star of the show was Vincent Van Ghoul, a powerful warlock who guided the team from his gothic mansion. And this is where the show becomes legendary. Vincent Van Ghoul was voiced by Vincent Price. Not a sound-alike and not an impression. The actual Vincent Price, the master of horror, the man who defined Gothic cinema for a generation, the voice on Michael Jackson's Thriller, was a regular cast member on a Saturday morning Scooby-Doo cartoon. Price brought his signature elegance, dry wit, and theatrical gravitas to a show aimed at 7-year-olds, and it elevated every single scene he was in. He reportedly loved the role. The combination of Vincent Price's voice acting with the Scooby-Doo formula created something that was atmospheric and spooky in a way no Scooby show had been before or has been since. Alongside Price, the cast featured veteran voice actors, including Don Messick as Scooby, Casey Kasem, yes, the top 40 radio legend, as Shaggy, and R.T. Johnson and Susan Blue in supporting roles. What made the 13 Ghosts truly unique was its tonal shift. For the first time in the franchise's history, the supernatural threats were real. The ghosts weren't guys in rubber suits pulling real estate scams. They were actual demons with real power, and the stakes were higher than anything Scooby-Doo had ever attempted. The serialized format gave the show narrative momentum, and Vincent Price's presence gave it a credibility that no other iteration of the franchise has matched. The show premiered on September 7, 1985, as part of ABC's Saturday morning block. It ran for 13 episodes, a number that was supposed to match the 13 ghosts the team needed to recapture. And then it was canceled because ratings were soft and ABC was reshuffling its lineup, and just like that, the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo was over. But the fact that earns this show the #1 spot is what it left behind. In 13 episodes, Scooby and the gang only captured 12 of the 13 ghosts. The show was literally canceled before it could finish its own premise. The entire point of the series, the number in the title, the quest that drove every episode, was left one ghost short. For 34 years, that 13th ghost remained uncaptured, and it became one of the longest-running unresolved plot threads in animation history. Finally, in 2019, Warner Bros. Released a direct-to-video movie called Scooby-Doo and the Curse of the 13th Ghost, which attempted to close the loop more than 3 decades later. The most recognizable franchise on this list, Vincent Price in a Scooby-Doo cartoon. A premise built on a specific, numbered goal. And they couldn't even finish the count. That's 1985 in a single story. Not every show on this list was a masterpiece. Some of these cartoons were creative and deserved far better than they got, while others were transparent toy commercials that lived and died by sales figures they couldn't control. But every single one of them represents a piece of 1985 that most people have completely forgotten, a year when the animation industry was swinging for the fences on every pitch, and most of those swings missed. If you watched any of these as a kid, even one of them, drop a comment. I want to know which ones you remember, which ones you'd forgotten, and which ones you're shocked even existed. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are plenty more forgotten chapters of cartoon history still to cover, and I promise you, they only get stranger from here.